Hey everyone, welcome back. So lately I've been doing some reflecting on how I got introduced to the classical guitar, and it really got me thinking, what advice would I give myself today if I was starting classical guitar from scratch? And I've narrowed it down to about 5 things that I think would have either made me a better player or got me to where I am faster if I would have followed this advice. But first, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. It would really help support the channel. So let's get into it. So the first piece of advice would be to relax. So I started classical guitar probably when I was in high school. I'd played for at least, I think, maybe 9 years before that. Initially, I was self-taught and played electric guitar and things like that, but hadn't really done classical guitar up until, I think, maybe junior year of high school, something like that. And I think when you're young, this piece of advice really just kind of flies over your head, but the most important thing you can do when you're practicing, playing, preparing, is to relax. I think this piece of advice gets overlooked, especially by younger or more inexperienced players, because as you start out, the pieces that you play are fairly simple, and they start progressively getting harder. And what happens is that you start building up tension that you don't even know you have, so you don't even know it's a problem. But until you have like a master class or a teacher address it, you really don't understand how much tension you're either carrying in your hands, or often you'll have tension just in your face. Like, I don't know how many people play guitar and their face just kind of goes, and they start making kind of weird guitarist face, or you get that tension like right behind your neck, like between your ears, that kind of upper back tension. And this can lead to you playing guitar a lot worse. I remember when I started to address these issues, it was just so much easier to play faster because I was more relaxed. I wasn't worried about things. I wasn't even as nervous when I was playing concerts because I felt better. I could breathe more easily. That's another source of tension. Sometimes people hunch and get into kind of weird guitar positions. And it makes it a lot harder to perform because you just can't breathe, which, by the way, also makes it hard to live. So I think my biggest piece of advice out of all 5 of these is to really start addressing your tension. Start doing some meditation, do some warm-ups, do some breathing exercises, and I think these will pay dividends when it comes to your preparation and practice. Now, my second tip is to listen to all genres of not just music, but specifically classical music, because we're mostly addressing classical guitar in this video. I think as classical guitarists specifically, we tend to listen to a lot of kind of popular Spanish pieces, things like that, maybe Bach, but a lot of us don't really go out of their way, especially at first, to find other genres of classical music and composers and things like that to listen to. So for instance, when I started classical guitar, I hated Renaissance music, like a lot. Because mostly the Renaissance pieces that I'd been introduced to were kind of beginner pieces that either one, I just didn't have any interest in playing, or I had heard performed, but just fairly poorly on like YouTube videos or something. And they just really didn't capture my imagination. And it wasn't until later when I was going through college that I had heard other genres of Renaissance music, mostly originating for lute, that really inspired me to like dig into that style and then start exploring it more. Because really it's a very rich tradition and there's so many different composers, whereas my impression of Renaissance music was just like the 2 pieces out of the Frederick Notebook. And I think this is one of the biggest benefits to being a classical guitar player, is that you have, over 500 years of repertoire to draw from, and you really need to explore that. I mean, you have medieval music, you have the Renaissance period, the Baroque, and in each of these style periods, there's so many different kind of sub-genres and schools that would branch out, especially in the Renaissance and the Baroque, I find. You listen to like Bach, Scarlatti, and some of the more obscure composers. There's so much kind of like rich musical tradition in that I think you really need to explore it, and it'll make you a much better musician. If you only listen to guitarists play other guitar pieces, it's fine. But if you start listening to like symphonies and pianists and violin players, string players, horn players, you get a much more kind of nuanced version of the music, and it really helps your playing. So basically what I'm saying is just break out of the guitar bubble. Now my third tip is probably the most unorthodox tip that I think you could give a classical guitar player, and that's to transcribe. So this is something I would normally give maybe a jazz student or a rock student, because you're mostly learning songs by ear. But I find classical musicians, more often than not, have probably the most underdeveloped ears out of most musicians. Just because, sheet music is such a big part about what we do, so it's kind of understandable. But at the same time, we mostly use ear training as like error detection. You understand what a major chord and a minor chord is, and you can kind of hear the intervals between the lines, and you can sight sing things. But it's not really to the same level as if you've ever studied jazz, where you pick out entire chords. There's sheet music, there's like lead sheets and things, but nobody really follows that. And frankly, if you're a really good jazz musician, you can probably just throw your real book in the trash. Which you really should do, and that's probably a video for another day if I ever do some jazz stuff. But really, if you start transcribing things by ear, and even just melodies, try to learn like a more simple classical guitar piece just by ear. And it will make you a such better musician, it'll make you a better composer, because you'll start understanding things on a deeper level than just recognition. I really don't think it's enough for a musician to just go, that's a perfect fifth interval, or like, that's a minor chord. Like, you kind of need to be able to understand progressions, you need to be able to hear like suspensions, motivic development, things like that, and it really only comes from transcribing it, playing it, and that kind of brings me to my fourth tip, composition. So one thing that I did as a younger player, but somewhere in the middle I kind of fell off and then kind of rejoined it later, is composing. So I loved composing pieces when I first started guitar, because you're just kind of in wonder of the whole learning how to play guitar thing, and you come up with cool chords. I remember when I learned an A minor chord and I lifted up my pointer finger and it made like a fancy sus thing, and I was like, I'm gonna write a song. And I think it's important that you don't lose that. I think it's not really a classical guitar thing. I think this is kind of more of a complaint I have with classical music, is that people think they need to have like 15 degrees to be able to write music. When you don't, you can write music and it'll be fine. I mean, the music history police will not come and take away your music or something. But it makes you a better guitar player and a better musician because you understand music on that deeper level. You're not so much like a robot that's just kind of looking at the sheet music and translating it. It's kind of a deeper connection that you have when you actually write a piece of music. You understand the harmony, you understand the motivations. And that's one thing I would tell people to do if you're starting out in guitar, is just try to write little things. Like, come up with a cool finger pattern, come up with a cool like little classical guitar riff, if there is such a thing. And just have fun with it. And I think it deepens your connection to the instrument and just makes it more fun, which will then make you want to play more, and it's just kind of this cycle that will help you become a better guitar player faster. And I think my fifth tip is mostly just for me, but take it with a grain of salt. I don't have any kind of like hard opinion on this, but I do kind of make a suggestion to a lot of younger players so that they possibly avoid some of the things that I've fallen into, and that's to use a guitar support. I know some people like using footstools, and I'm not saying you shouldn't use a footstool. I don't want to get a bunch of hate comments because it's like, I love my footstool. Use your footstool. It's fine. I really don't care. But what I will say is that for people like me who used a footstool since they were in high school, didn't have a problem, but as you start, pushing 30, that footstool does not feel all that well. Now, some people, if they start when they're young, I think their back gets warped or something and it just never bothers them. That's fine. But for me, it really started to hurt my back. It really started to give me tension. When you practice for long periods of time, like hours and hours, if you're just a hobbyist player, you probably will never notice it, so use a footstool. But when you go through, college, master's degrees, preparing for concerts, you're practicing hours and hours. And if you were like me, you're teaching for another 8 hours. And if you're sitting, with your foot cranked up like that, and you're like this, and yeah, I know you could sit, with your back straight and do all this stuff, but it still doesn't fix the alignment of your spine, which in my case was the problem. There's literally nothing you can do. Your foot's raised. I mean, I don't care how relaxed you are. If you have magical Zen monk kind of meditation kung fu powers, your body still has to follow the rules of anatomy and physics. It just hurt. Now, if you like your footstool, use your footstool. But for me, it helped me breathe better, because one kind of side effect that nobody really talks about when you're using a footstool is that depending on the height of the footstool to get a comfortable height of the guitar and the neck angle and things, is that it really does kind of compress your chest a little bit. Like, even if you sit straight up and you raise one leg, it's kind of hard to take a really deep breath, which really causes a lot of tension. When I sit with a guitar support and both feet are level and my guitar is kind of at that nice 45-degree angle, I can breathe, I can move, I can turn. I don't have that tension in my shoulder. When I'm doing this, that small little bit of tension just really creeps into my playing. And I kind of think I'd be a better guitar player if I would have known something like an ergo play existed. Which when I started, YouTube really wasn't that big of a thing. Outside of festivals, I really didn't see people use them. I saw mostly footstools. So it really, honestly, wasn't that well known of a thing that you could just go buy like an ergo play. I remember a friend of mine bought one and I was just like, what is that? It was like the coolest thing. I sat down with it and I was like, I'm not going back. I tried going back to a footstool a couple times with the same results. It still hurt. You know, I still was teaching like 8+ hours a day and practicing, and it's just not the greatest thing. And for those of you starting out, you know, you might have a hard time finding position. So if you have something like an ergo play that just literally props it up at a perfect 45-degree angle and you just hands-free, don't have to do anything, it's kind of a win-win. So I mean, I kind of recommend that for most of my younger students. It's just one less hassle you don't have to deal with finding like the perfect footstool height and things. And yeah, you have to deal with suction cups, but it's not that big of a deal, really. But those are kind of my 5 tips. If you have any more you want to add, please let me know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.